I wasn't supposed to be there that day. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moments that stay with you forever, they never announce themselves. You're not standing there thinking, pay attention, this is going to matter. You're just cold. You're just tired. You're just wishing your shoes didn't have a hole in the left sole, letting the wet London pavement seep in millimeter by millimeter. I was supposed to be on a train to Edinburgh by 11. My bag was packed, sitting at the hotel 3 blocks from Paddington. I had a reservation, a printed ticket, a whole itinerary that a friend had spent 2 weeks building in a color-coded spreadsheet. But I'd woken up that morning with the grey London sky pressing against my window like a hand flat on glass, and something in me had said, not yet. So I walked. No destination. Just my coat, my camera, and the particular aimlessness that comes over you in a city that isn't yours but feels, somehow, like it's been waiting for you. I ended up at Buckingham Palace the way most people do, not because they planned it, but because London eventually just delivers you there. You turn a corner, cross a park, and, suddenly, the gates are in front of you, iron and gold and so aggressively grand that for a moment your brain short-circuits between is this real and I've seen this on a biscuit tin. It was a Tuesday in late October. That detail matters. Tourists come to Buckingham Palace every single day of the year, but October is a particular flavor of visitor. Summer has cleared out the families with strollers and matching t-shirts. What's left in October is a more serious breed, the ones who actually read the plaques, who hold their cameras with 2 hands, who came specifically for this and know it. Americans on their first trip. Retirees from everywhere. A handful of school groups from Europe in matching yellow safety vests, their teachers counting heads with the focused desperation of people who know exactly what is at stake. The forecourt was about half full when I arrived. Maybe 150 people pressed along the railings, a polite but insistent crowd doing the slow jostle that happens when everyone wants the same photograph and nobody wants to admit they're shoving. The sky was the color of old pewter, not raining but promising to, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more cinematic than it has any right to be. And there, at the far right of the forecourt, the ceremonial post, the one closest to the small gatehouse, stood the guard. I noticed him before anything happened, because that's what you do. You look at the guards the way you look at anything surreal, with a kind of fascinated disbelief. The bearskin hat, which is more enormous in person than any photograph prepares you for. The red tunic, so deeply red it looks almost theatrical, like someone insisted on the exact shade of red that would red from 50 meters. The white gloves. The rifle, held at a specific angle that manages to look both ceremonial and, if you look at the hands, the stillness in the hands, deeply serious. He was young. That was the first thing I thought. Under the hat, under the stoic face, he was young. Maybe 22, 23. The kind of young where you can still see the boy in the jaw not quite finished settling into itself. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance with a focus that wasn't blank, it was trained. There's a difference. Blank is absence. This was presence so controlled it looked like absence. I raised my camera. Most people do. That's fine. He was used to it. The flashes, the pointing, the little ripple of delight that goes through tourists when they first see the hat up close. He'd been standing there long enough that the couple to my left had already done the full routine, edged closer, angled for the selfie, inched their elbow just past the boundary marker, thought better of it, stepped back. The usual. What I didn't notice at first, because I was looking through my viewfinder, was the man working his way through the crowd from the left. I heard him before I saw him clearly. An American accent, not a regional one, the kind of accent that comes from somewhere deliberately non-specific, the flat and slightly carrying vowels of a man who has spent his life in rooms where the loudest voice wins. He was saying something to the woman beside him, laughing at his own punchline before he'd finished it. When I lowered my camera, I got my first real look at him. Late 40s. Somewhere in that territory. Thick build, good jacket, one of those expensive casual jackets that are designed to look like you don't care while costing more than your rent. Red baseball cap with no logo. Sunglasses pushed up on his forehead despite the overcast sky, which struck me as the kind of detail that tells you everything about a person in one gesture. The sunglasses weren't up there because the sun was in his eyes. They were up there because they'd always been up there, because that's just where they lived, because the possibility of needing them was its own kind of statement. He was moving with the particular energy of a man who has decided he is having a good time and intends to drag everyone in his immediate vicinity along for the ride whether they like it or not. His companion, a woman I took to be his wife or girlfriend, someone who had the slightly patient expression of a person who loved him and had learned to stay 2 seconds behind, was filming on her phone, tracking something else in the crowd. He came to a stop about 4 feet from the guard. Pulled out his own phone. Started filming. Fine. Everyone was filming. That's not a story. That's just a Tuesday. But then, he said something. I was maybe 8 feet away at this point, camera back up, half focused on something else. I didn't catch the first words, just the tail end of the sentence, and the tone, which was the tone of a man performing for an audience he'd assembled in his own head. Not cruel, not yet. But testing. The kind of testing that starts as a joke and becomes something else depending on what happens next. The guard did not react. Not a flicker. Not a twitch. Eyes straight ahead, hands still, chest moving with the measured breath of someone who has rehearsed this specific stillness so many times it has become indistinguishable from instinct. The man laughed. Said something to his companion, who gave a small, uncertain smile. He stepped closer. Not dramatically. Just an inch or two, the kind of encroachment you could chalk up to the crowd pressure if you wanted to, if you were being charitable. But the crowd wasn't pressing him forward. He chose that inch. He owned it. I put my camera down properly this time. There was a woman next to me, older, British accent, small and bird-boned in a navy coat, one of those women who carry an umbrella like a scepter and have the quiet authority of someone who has outlasted several decades of nonsense. She hadn't lowered her camera yet, but her attention had shifted. I could feel it. "Oh, don't," she said under her breath. "Not to me. Not to anyone." Just into the air, the quiet reflex of someone who could already see where this road went. He stepped closer again. 4 feet had become 2. 2 feet is not a lot of space between a person and a standing soldier holding a rifle, a soldier who has been told, trained, drilled, conditioned down to the cellular level exactly what is expected of him and exactly what he must not do and exactly what is permissible and exactly what is not. 2 feet is nothing. 2 feet is intimate. The guard's jaw tightened. The first movement I'd seen from him in the 10 minutes I'd been watching. Just the jaw. So small a shift that most people would have missed it. I didn't miss it. He said something. Not loud. Not aggressive. Low and controlled and carrying the specific weight of a warning that does not need to raise its voice to mean exactly what it means. I was close enough now to hear it. "Sir, please step back." The accent was northern Yorkshire, maybe, or somewhere close to it. The voice was young like his face, but not his eyes. Whatever was in his eyes had been there longer than the rest of him. The American didn't step back. He laughed. It was a specific laugh, not a mean one, not exactly. The laugh of a man who cannot quite believe that anything being directed at him is actually serious. The laugh of someone who has moved through the world in a body and a life that have never required him to take a warning at face value. "Easy, buddy," he said. Still filming. Just getting a picture. Something happened then, in the people nearest to them. That slow, collective shift of awareness, the leaning in without leaning in, the held breath that passes through a crowd like a ripple through standing water. People stopped talking to each other. People stopped looking at their phones. The yellow-vested school group, 10 meters away, went inexplicably quiet. The woman in the navy coat beside me had finally lowered her camera. The guard's eyes moved. For the first time since I'd arrived, they moved. Not far. A fraction. But they landed directly, unmistakably, on the man in front of him. When a person who has been looking at nothing looks directly at you, the shift is enormous. "Sir." Just the one word this time. But the word had mass. The American looked at his phone screen, repositioned his angle, stepped forward one more time. And, the guard moved. You have to understand what it means for a king's guard to move. Not the ceremonial march, the slow, boot-stamping patrol along the forecourt that tourists film and post and caption with exclamation marks. That's the performance, the choreography, the thing they came for. That movement is expected. It is safe. It belongs to the show. This was the other kind of movement. This was the kind that comes before the choreography, before the drill, before the years of standing still at Windsor and St. James's and, here, at the gates of Buckingham and every weather the island had ever manufactured. This was the movement underneath all of it, older than the training, older than the uniform. The kind that means, enough. It happened fast. Not violently. Not even, in the strictest technical sense, aggressively. But fast and decisive, and with a clarity so absolute that the crowd around me seemed to stop breathing at exactly the same moment I did. He stepped forward. One long step, a soldier's step, not a civilian's, and his voice came with it, and this time the voice was not low and controlled and carrying a quiet warning. This time it was a command. The full register of it, chest and authority and something that was not anger but was also not anger. The way a door that is simply closed is not the same as a door that has been shut. Stand back. Now. The word now landed like a physical thing. The American stumbled backward. I don't think he meant to. I think his body did it before his brain had processed the instruction, that old animal reflex that responds to sudden authority before the conscious mind can intercede with opinions about it. His phone dropped. Didn't fall far, the strap caught it at his wrist, but it jerked loose from his grip and dangled there, still recording, pointed at the ground. There was a sound from the crowd. Not a gasp, exactly. Something more complicated. More layered. The sharp intake of 100 breaths happening at different speeds, some fast with shock, some slow with the particular satisfaction of people who had been watching something approach and are now watching it arrive. The woman in the navy coat made a sound. A short, involuntary syllable. The American straightened. He was, you could watch it happen, attempting to reclaim himself. The way a person does when they've been caught off guard and their pride has interpreted it as a wound that needs immediate treatment. His chin came up. His shoulders went back. The phone came with it, recaptured, and I saw his thumb move on the screen. He was still recording. For one long second, nobody moved. The guard stood in front of him, maybe 18 inches between them now, the rifle affixed and non-negotiable presence at the edge of that 18 inches, and looked at him with an expression I have been trying to find the right word for ever since. It wasn't fury. Fury is hot and leaking. This was not leaking. It wasn't contempt. Contempt requires the other person to be beneath you. This was different. This was eye level. This was, I see exactly who you are, and I know exactly what is required of me, and neither of those two things have any conflict in this moment. The American said something. Lower now. Not for the crowd. I was close enough to catch pieces of it, just a tourist, taking it too serious, doesn't have to be a whole. The guard didn't let him finish. You will step back behind the marker, sir. You will do it now. And, you will not approach this post again. Each sentence its own separate object. Placed down in the space between them one at a time. The wife-girlfriend, the patient woman who had been filming something else, lowered her phone. I watched her face. She'd been wearing the particular expression that comes from years of managing a person who needs managing, the face of someone who has developed extraordinary peripheral vision for exactly this kind of moment. But, even she looked different now. The management expression had shifted into something more uncertain. Something that registered, perhaps for the first time in this particular outing, that this was not a boundary that was going to move. The American looked at the crowd. A mistake. Not because the crowd was hostile, they weren't, not exactly. But, they were watching. Fully watching, phones up, the collective gaze of 150 people who had been assembled by accident in front of something they had not come here to see and were now very much not going to look away from. And, there is something about being watched the way this crowd was watching, without sympathy, without the cushioning of ambiguity that recalibrates a person. That removes the performance possibility. That says, whatever you do next, you're going to have to live with having done it in front of all of these people. I saw it go through him. Just briefly. A flicker. The jaw loosening slightly. The eyes moving across the row of faces and finding nowhere comfortable to land. His wife touched his arm. Not a grab. Not a pull. Just a touch. 2 fingers on his jacket sleeve, the gentlest possible assertion of please. He stepped back. Behind the marker. Exactly where he'd been told. Nobody cheered. I think if anyone had cheered, it would have broken something, some necessary gravity in the moment. Instead, there was a kind of collective exhale, long and uneven, as the crowd redistributed the tension it had been holding. People started talking to each other again in low voices. Phones went back up, some still filming, some texting, some already sending. The guard returned to his post. Stepped back into position. Lifted his chin. Fixed his gaze back on the middle distance, back on the nothing that is something, the trained focus that looks like absence and is not. His jaw was still set. But the stillness was back. I stood there for a moment, just stood there. My camera hanging at my side, forgotten. The cold coming through the hole in my left shoe, back to announcing itself. I became aware that I had been holding my shoulders up near my ears for an unknown amount of time and let them drop. The yellow-vested school group erupted, all at once, in German, that particular pitch of 20 adolescent voices processing something simultaneously, the collective nervous energy of kids who have just witnessed something that none of their teachers were prepared to debrief. Their supervising teacher, a woman in a red coat, was already moving through them, already doing the work of reassembling the group, but her face had that look teachers get when something has happened that they will absolutely be discussing in the staff room. The bird-boned woman in the navy coat turned to me. She didn't know me. We hadn't spoken. But she turned to me with the ease of strangers who have just shared something real, who have been stood in the same moment long enough that the normal social architecture simply doesn't apply anymore. Well, she said. Just well. Nothing else. I nodded. It felt exactly right. The American and his partner had moved. Not fled, moved, with the controlled pace of people exercising their right to depart with some dignity intact, heading left along the railings toward the Victoria Memorial and the anonymity of the park beyond. I watched them go. He had his arm around her shoulder now, and she had let him put it there, and they were talking heads together, low, and whatever was passing between them had the quality of something being processed, something being rewritten. His phone was back in his jacket pocket. For the first time since I'd noticed him, it was in his pocket. I turned back to the guard. He was still. Completely still. No indication that anything had happened. No residual tension in the shoulders, no trace of the last 10 minutes in his posture or his face or the precise angle of his rifle. The bearskin hat sat on his head with its usual impossible grandeur. The red of the tunic was exactly what it had always been. But I was looking at his hands now, and his hands were not the same as before. The left hand. At the base of his thumb, where the white glove met the cuff, a tiny, rhythmic movement. Not a tremor. Not quite. Just a small, private contraction, repeating slowly. The way a person's hand sometimes moves when the rest of them is being very, very still. He was 22. Maybe 23. He was standing in the cold in October in front of a crowd of 150 strangers and he was doing his job and he was young and his jaw had been set for a long time and the only thing that had moved, in all of it, was that small private motion at the base of his left thumb. I raised my camera. Not for the crowd shot. Not for the wide, impressive frame. I zoomed in just slightly on his face. The jaw. The eyes fixed on the middle distance. The hat. The November light on the white glove. I pressed the shutter. And then, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I just stayed. Not to see if something else happened. Not because I thought the story was continuing. But because it felt like the wrong thing to leave. Like the crowd thinning out around him after all of that, after he had stood his ground, after he had done the thing he was trained to do and also the thing any person would have needed to do, felt like an abandonment. Like turning your back on someone mid-sentence. So I stayed. I stood in the October cold with the pewter sky and the railings and the faraway sound of London moving through its day behind me, and I watched him stand his ground in the aftermath of something nobody was going to officially acknowledge had happened, and I thought about the particular loneliness of a job that requires you to be both visible and invisible at the same time. To be the most looked at person in any given square of pavement and simultaneously to be required to absorb everything that looking brings, the cameras, the jokes, the inches of encroachment, and convert it all, somehow, into stillness. It costs something. It has to. You don't stand like that for free. I don't know his name. I still don't know his name. There was no name tag, no way to ask, no mechanism in the whole performance that allowed for the exchange of something as ordinary as a name. But I know he was from Yorkshire. Or near it. I know he was young in the jaw and older in the eyes. I know the small private motion at the base of his left thumb. And I know he didn't blink. Not once, in the whole long minute after the American stepped back and the crowd recalibrated and the world resumed its indifferent turning, not once did he blink. The thing about moments like that is what they do to the people around the edges. Not the main players. Not the man who pushed and the man who held. The people at the edges, the ones who were just there, who didn't plan it, who will go home and try to explain it to someone who wasn't standing in the cold outside Buckingham Palace on a Tuesday in October, and will find that the words available to them are all slightly wrong. Because the story as a story is simple. Tourist pushes too far. Guard responds. Tourist backs down. Crowd disperses. That's not a particularly unusual story. Versions of it happen at tourist sites all over the world. You could set it in Paris, in Rome, in Washington, with different uniforms and different thresholds and different endings. But the thing that happened in the 30 minutes after, the ripple of it, the way it moved through the crowd and then through the street and then, somehow, through me, that's the part that doesn't compress into 3 sentences. That's the part that kept making me stay when I should have left, that made me miss my train to Edinburgh without quite noticing I'd missed it, that made me stand in the cold outside a palace in October watching a young man hold himself still until the skin of my face went numb. Let me tell you what I saw. There was a boy. Maybe 9. British, by the sound of him, standing with his father about 4 meters to my right. He'd been there the whole time, but I hadn't really seen him until the American had gone and the crowd had resettled and the boy looked up at his father. Did that man get in trouble? He asked. His father said he was warned. But did he get in trouble? The father looked at the guard, at his back in position stillness, at the forecourt resuming its ordinary shape, and, he said, with the particular economy of a British parent explaining something British to a British child, the guard did his job. That's enough. The boy thought about this for a moment. Then, he looked at the guard with an expression that was pure and unguarded and wholly respectful, the way children look at things before they've learned to be ironic about them, before the social instruction kicks in that tells them reverence is embarrassing. He looked at the guard the way you look at something that has just demonstrated it is real. I watched him watch. I thought, this will stay with him. Not the drama of it. Not the confrontation. But the guard going back to his position. The guard choosing stillness again, on the other side of all of it. That will stay with him. The woman in the navy coat was still near me. We'd been standing companionably in the silence of strangers who shared something, and I had been thinking she might just dissolve back into the crowd the way people do in cities, present one moment, gone the next, but she was still there, looking at the forecourt with an expression I was trying to read. My husband was in the army, she said. Still not quite to me. Somewhere between me and the gates. Not ceremonial. Actual. Belfast in the 80s. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was still looking at the guard. The discipline it takes, she said. People don't understand it. They see the hat and the red coat and they think it's pageantry. Fancy dress. She stopped. Took a breath in. It's not fancy dress. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. She wasn't looking for a response. She went on, my husband used to say the hardest thing was knowing when. Knowing when the moment has come and not going before it and not going after it. Knowing your line and holding it and then crossing it at exactly the right second. She paused. He said that was everything. The rest of it, the courage, the training, all of it is just preparation for knowing that one thing. The guard turned and began the slow ceremonial march back along the forecourt. The crowd moved with him slightly, tracking. Cameras went up again. The woman straightened her coat. Picked up her umbrella from where she'd been holding it loose at her side. He knew his line, she said. Simply. She walked away. I never got her name either. I went and found a coffee van near the Victoria Memorial and stood with my back to the wind and drank something that was technically coffee in the way that the October sky was technically light. I was thinking about the American. Not with anger. Not anymore. The moment had been what it was and he'd pushed and the guard had drawn the line and he'd stepped back. End of story, on one level. The kind of thing that would maybe be a dinner party story. You should have seen this guard. He absolutely lost his, that gets mileage and then fades. But I kept thinking about the specific moment when he'd looked at the crowd. The way his eyes had moved along all those faces and found no cushion. I've been in rooms like that. Maybe not the same room, not with a rifle at the edge of it, but the room where the faces around you rearrange your sense of yourself by simply looking. Where the audience you've been performing for suddenly becomes something else. It's uncomfortable in a way that goes deeper than embarrassment. Embarrassment is surface. What happens in that moment goes somewhere older. Somewhere prior. He'd stepped back. I don't know what that cost him. I don't know what the walk to the Victoria Memorial was like, his arm around his partner's shoulder, whatever was being said in that low, close conversation. Maybe he was defensive. Maybe he was angry. Maybe, and I keep returning to this possibility, the way you return to a stone in your shoe, maybe some part of him had felt something more complicated. The way you sometimes feel, in the aftermath of being stopped, a kind of underwater relief. The secret gratitude of a body that needed someone else to apply the brake. I don't know. I have no idea who that man is. What his life is. What he carries. The sunglasses on his forehead and the expensive casual jacket are not a person. But I keep thinking about the step back. He stepped back. And then he walked away with his arm around someone who had touched his sleeve with two fingers and asked him wordlessly to come back to himself. And they'd walked, and they'd talked, and somewhere in London that evening they would eat dinner and maybe not mention it and maybe mention it once and maybe the weight of the afternoon would be different for each of them and they would not entirely close the gap between those two different weights. That's a human story. That's as human as the guard's jaw and the boy's face and the woman and her husband and Belfast in the 80s and the small motion at the base of a thumb. I didn't miss my train in any dramatic sense. I just didn't leave. I stood outside the gates for another 40 minutes, drinking bad coffee, and then I bought a second one from the same van because I couldn't think of anywhere to be. I watched the guard change, the rotation that happens with its own ceremony, the crisp precision of two soldiers meeting and exchanging, the outgoing guard's face finally, releasing whatever it had been holding in a small, private way as he turned and marched toward the gate. He passed maybe 15 feet from me on his way back. His expression was neutral now. His eyes forward. The jaw still set but different now, the set of a person who was off duty, who was carrying something internally but no longer performing the carrying. He walked with the stiff precision of someone whose legs have been held in one position for too long. Young. Still young. 22 or 23 with all the evidence of a Tuesday in October in his face. I thought about saying something. I have been thinking about what that something might have been ever since, and I still don't know. What does a civilian say to a soldier who has just done the job nobody notices until it needs doing? Good job. Too thin. I was watching. Too strange. I took your photograph. That seems worse. I didn't say anything. He passed. He went through the inner gate. He was gone. I caught the 4:40 train to Edinburgh. Sat in the window seat with my camera bag on my lap and watched London recede, the outer estates and the warehouse conversions and the industrial stretches that the city keeps behind its back like a long ugly secret, and thought about the photograph. I checked it on the train. The timing wasn't perfect. I'd caught him a half second after he'd fully reset his gaze, so his eyes were on the middle distance and his chin was lifted and the October light fell on the white of the glove at exactly the angle I hadn't planned but would have planned if I'd been smart enough to plan it. The jaw was set but not extreme. The bearskin hat cut a clean edge against the pale sky. It was a good photograph. Possibly the best I've taken. Not because of the technical execution, which was adequate at best, but because of what's in his face. What isn't in his face, actually, the blankness that isn't blankness, the train stillness that costs something. You look at the photograph and, you know, without being told, that this was taken after. After something. The after is in the picture even though the something isn't. I've looked at it a lot in the weeks since. There's a thing that happens with certain photographs where they become more, not less, over time. Where the longer you look, the more the image has to tell you. This is one of those photographs. Every time I look I see something different, the angle of the hat brim, the specific way the fingers lie against the rifle, the quality of the focus in the eyes. The focus that looks like absence and is not. I've told this story a few times since October. At dinner tables, in conversations that land on that well-traveled topic, the English and their institutions, the tourists and their entitlement, the performance of duty and what that costs the performer. I tell it and people respond in different ways. Some with the emphatic serves him right that requires no further analysis. Some with the more complicated response, the ambivalence about the guard's authority, the questions about the system he represents, whether the ceremony of it is about pride or about something else. Those conversations are good. I don't have a fixed position on most of it. I was in the crowd. I was watching. I came with my camera and my missed train and a hole in my shoe and I saw what I saw. But the thing I always come back to, the thing that sits with me in a way the arguments don't, is not the confrontation itself. It's the boy. It's the boy looking at the guard with that face. That open, unironic face. The face of someone watching something demonstrate that it is real. And the guard going back to his position in the aftermath of everything, stepping back into the stillness, reclaiming it, putting it on again like something he owns, and the crowd watching him do it, most of them not fully knowing they were watching it, most of them already on their phones sending the video to someone, but watching. All of us watching a young man from Yorkshire stand in the October cold and hold the line. That's not pageantry. The woman was right. There's a quote I can't stop thinking about. I don't know where I first heard it, can't attribute it properly, something about how discipline is not the absence of freedom but the deepest exercise of it. The choosing, every single moment, what you will and will not permit. I think about that in relation to him. 22, 23. The whole long catalogue of things he'd had to stand still for, the cameras, the encroachment, the jokes, the October cold, the Tuesdays. The whole long training in how to hold yourself in the face of a world that keeps testing whether you mean it. He meant it. That's the whole story, really. In a forecourt full of people looking for something to remember, a young man from Yorkshire stood in the cold and meant it. And, when the test came, when the inch turned into 2 and the warning was dismissed and the moment arrived, he knew exactly what his line was, and he crossed it at exactly the right second. The rest of us got to stand in the warmth of that, for a moment. Even the American got to stand in it, I think. Even if he didn't know what he was standing in. Even him. I still have the photograph. I haven't posted it anywhere. I don't know that I will. Some things are better as private evidence, proof that a thing happened, that you were there, that it was real. The focus that looks like absence and is not. That's enough.